How a story about witches became a mirror for power, identity, and resistance. When Wicked for Good arrived on screen, it did more than retell a familiar Aussian myth. It reframed it, inviting us to consider who counts as good, who gets branded wicked, and how power manufactures these labels to serve itself. At its core, Wicked has always been a story about narrative control, how regimes decide truth, and how people are forced to bend themselves into versions that feel acceptable. And I think this film sharpens those ideas with cinematic precision. One of the film's strongest themes is the industrialization of perception. What does that mean? Oz is not simply a whimsical city, it is a political engine that runs on spectacle. Here, goodness is not moral, it is performative, it is a performance, it is crafted, marketed, and rehearsed. So, enter Glinda, who becomes the clearest illustration of a government shaped identity. The film visually encodes Glinda's loss of autonomy through her wardrobe when she is groomed by the regime, primarily by Madame Morrible. The blue dress becomes a uniform rather than a choice, because blue in Oz is the color of political theater. It is polished, obedient, and presentable. So Glinda wearing blue is Glinda as commodity, Glinda as message, Glinda as product. She becomes the smiling mascot of the wizard's propaganda machine and the good witch, molded not by her own desire, but by what Oz needs her to be. In literature, this is classic archetypal assimilation, where a woman is absorbed into an institution and reshaped to fit the institution's image. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale uses clothing in similar ways. What you wear is who you are allowed to be. Speaking of Madame Morrible, her character is the embodiment of institutional power disguised as mentorship. She orchestrates everyone's futures with the ease of someone shuffling chess pieces for a big duration of the plot. So I would say, while Madame Morrible's magic is in her storm wielding capability, um, her real power is, in fact, that she has influence. Because in Oz, as we see, influence is the strongest magic of all. Her manipulation of Glinda is particularly insidious because she shapes and positions Glinda until Glinda's public image belongs more to Morrible than to Glinda herself. Thankfully, at the end of the wizard's reign, and crucially after Madame Morrible's imprisonment, Glinda emerges in her iconic pink dress, not as a return to naivete, but as a reclamation of herself. Pink has become a self chosen symbol for Glinda. She is no longer a puppet of the regime, and Glinda steps into a leadership role forged through experience, loss, and truth instead of by obedience to a regime. The contrast between the blue and the pink dress becomes a visual thesis. Blue Glinda was designed by the state. Pink Glinda is authored by herself. This mirrors many real world stories of people in public roles who have to navigate the tension between image and identity. So, politicians, artists, activists, these are people who are put in a world right now with systems that intend to shape their voices but not truly hear them. Parallel to Glinda's domestication is Elphaba's alienation. Her greenness is a metaphorical hypervisibility, a body marked as different, dangerous, or unmanageable. So, despite her talent and intelligence and kindness, the system treats her as a threat because she cannot be molded into the state's image. Where Glinda is offered assimilation for her compliance, Elphaba is offered erasure for all that all that is unmoldable about her. So the wizard's regime weaponizes public fear to keep its power intact, which reflects real world patterns in how some governments demonize outsiders, reformers, and whistleblowers. And the film pushes the audience to recognize how swiftly society can turn on someone when authority dictates a narrative. But what makes Elphaba's alienation so tragic is that this all happens in spite of and because of her kindness. Because in Oz, compassion becomes subversive. Elphaba was the only student who listened when Dr. Dillerman warns of the creeping silencing of animal voices. And she is the only one who cares enough to question why animals are being stripped of speech, autonomy, and agency. She rescues the lion cub, not out of rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but out of instinctive empathy, a reflexive refusal to let any innocent creature suffer. And this is exactly why the system fears her. Elphaba's kindness exposes the cruelty of the regime. Her integrity exposes its corruption. And her refusal to turn away exposes everyone's willingness to. She sees injustice and refuses to play along, and in a society built on curated narratives and artificial harmony, a woman who acts from her own moral conviction suddenly becomes intolerable. Thus, the story's central opposition, if you think about it, really has nothing to do with sorcery, but everything to do with sovereignty. Glinda becomes the face the system can sculpt. Elphaba becomes the conscience that the system cannot erase. And in a world built on lies, the truth is always the first thing branded wicked. Where the state seeks to divide them, the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba becomes the story's emotional and moral axis. Their bonds complicates the binary of good versus wicked. Glinda is good because she performs goodness. Elphaba is wicked because she refuses to perform. But their love, that is messy but loyal and deeply human, presents a power that no regime can counterfeit. Their friendship becomes a counter narrative, a quiet rebellion against the roles they are forced into. When they meet at the midpoint of the story, their shared vulnerability becomes the first crack in the wizard's narrative machine, and their trust becomes a quiet, persistent rebellion against a system that thrives on division. They meet in a world built to keep them in opposing roles, good and wicked. Yet their friendship becomes an act of moral clarity, an insistence on connection in the face of a regime that demands they stand on opposite sides of its narrative war. Wicked for Good shows us how friendship can undermine and overthrow ideological division, the kind crafted by authoritarian storytelling. Systems can script conflict, sure, but it is friendship, reaching out to each other and understanding each other and developing that friendship that can rewrite the script. It is in that rewriting that those unexpected alliances, that new possibilities for justice emerges.